All right, welcome back to another episode of Travel Ball Talk. I'm your host, Rich Prado, owner of Play in School. Today we're heading back to Jersey. It's like back-to-back episodes up in Jersey, and we'll actually talk about that in a second. But today we are visiting with Pat Geroni, owner of PRD Baseball and Ghost Baseball. Pat, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, yeah, like I said, back-to-back weeks, heading up to New Jersey for this podcast with one of the last call was with a friend of yours, AJ, or Ajay. I guess, like I said, you flip a coin and I'll probably mispronounce the name. And I was texting with Ajay earlier. His episode got a lot of love, man. Got a lot of love. So hopefully. Hopefully we're able to pull in some of his listeners to listen to this podcast too, because I'm assuming there might be some crossover, some interest, which you'll tell us about in a second. But I'm hoping that I can just hand the mic over to you and just allow you to introduce yourself to the listeners, kind of give your background, and then walk us up to what's PRD, where'd PRD come from, and and Ghost Baseball, the whole relationship, and everything else that you have cooking.
Sure. I will run you down on the whole thing. So my name is Pat Geroni. I am the majority owner and operator of PRD Baseball Academy. The way that PRD began, well before we were teams, I began training players as a full-time accountant in 2004. I played college baseball at Fairleigh Dickinson in Teaneck, a small Division I school in North Jersey.
Wait, where?
After FDU in Teaneck, Fairleigh Dickinson in Teaneck.
No kidding. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, man. So I was an accounting major there. Didn't get drafted, didn't get signed. Decided I did not want to go play independent ball. So I took a job in sales for Allegiance Telecom and then T-Mobile, got a stint as an accountant, started doing a few lessons because I missed baseball, started doing a few lessons on the weekend at one of my father's friend's academy close to Sandy Hook in New Jersey, in Navesink. Had a couple clients over the next few months, ended up having 10, 20 clients on the weekends, just grew more increasingly frustrated with accounting and the corporate world on an entry level situation. So I decided that I was going to go back to school to be a teacher. I grew my own personal training book while I was gaining my post back in education. Started teaching at 26, taught for the next 15 years, became a head varsity coach when I was, 30. At Monroe Township in New Jersey, spent some time there, continued to grow the training piece of our business, and I was able and fortunate enough to acquire some of the key pieces that are still with us. One is named Sean McCorkle. It's been with me for about 16 years now. Sean was the seventh round pick of the Mariners in 1999, played at Montclair. We taught at the same school together, and the other key piece was Mark Magliero, who is our arm performance guy, in my opinion, the best arm performance guy in the Northeast. So they were doing lessons with us, training people under myself. And in 2017, we decided to start teams. The premise of why we started teams was that as a high school coach, I just felt really strongly about the type of life lessons and what type of vision a company needs to give a young athlete, what they need to be successful, not just on the baseball field, but in life. I thought at that current time, it was lacking a little bit. It was the industry was struggling, at least in our area. So we started a couple teams, never really envisioned being where we are now. We just did 2 teams to try to help kids. Training was our bread and butter, turned into 4 teams, turned into 8 teams. Originally we were called the Peninsula River Dogs, and that's where PRD comes from.
Wow.
Yeah. So everyone always asks me, where's PRD come from? And the reason we did that is we had a lot of kids from Rumson, Little Silver, and Fairhaven, and around here that's known as the Peninsula.
Gotcha.
So we used the Peninsula, and the Rumson dogs were probably 40 to 50% of our team were Rumson kids at that point. We only had 2 teams, like I said. So we did the Peninsula River Dogs. And then once it expanded, we realized, and that was a few months later, we're like, well, we were going to have to shorten this and we have to make it more palatable for people outside this area. So we turned it to PRD. We were just playing on like more of a local level, nothing like what Ajay was doing at the time with, I guess he was with Arsenal National still at that time. We were just a local team that were training kids that we had really good players, but they weren't the type of kids that were really in the know on the national side. They weren't looking to travel for the whole summer and things of that nature. Right. So as we got deep into the business, we were educated. We were more educated and learned how the landscape was changing. So we created Ghost. Ghost was actually just like a kind of a word for guest. When we started our Ghost program, we picked a week that nobody else was playing out of our competitors, and we called it, PRD Ghost. And the premise of it was, if you played with us for this 1 week, and this was in late 2017, you could practice with us all year. And we wouldn't charge you for that practice, but you would play on our Ghost team, which would be 1 tournament for the summer, 1 tournament for the fall. It was almost like a speakeasy team where we weren't going to post it on social media, and we weren't going to, for lack of a better word, get you in trouble with the club you were playing with. It was just extra baseball with people that know how to run a practice, know how to run drills, know how to train and develop players. And what happened was the kids that came into Ghost from other clubs, they at that point didn't want to leave. So we then decided to use Ghost as our like regional/national model, and that's kind of how the Ghost program began.
There's a lot of things to unpack in there. The first of which is, I think you'll appreciate. My dad was a St. Peter's guy,
okay,
and did high school in Weehawken.
Yeah.
So I don't tell many people, but the few listeners of this podcast have maybe heard that I was actually born in Hackensack. So there's a little bit of a connection to you, to the Jersey crew up there.
Yeah.
So the thing so PRD kind of grew organically. You get the facility and training. The teams they're gonna come. Like that's a pretty natural progression. The Ghost thing, hearing the background on the Ghost thing is pretty interesting. Where you say, hey, here's an open weekend. If you want to come join us at this event, come on out. So it's almost like this floating roster.
Yep.
But then they stick around. They say, hey, we dig it. We like your style. And it becomes a permanent thing. So now you've got 2 different brands. One is, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you were saying PRD kind of more local, and Ghost is more regional. Did you have any kids or parents, and probably not the kids, but did you have any parents who would come out to a workout or like a tryout and think that they're going to be regional, national guys, and they get put on the PRD, the local team? Was there ever any like sort of like a pushback or blowback from that? Because I can imagine parents, getting a little bit bent out of shape when you are. Listen, not to say any names, but there's a lot of clubs out there who have a B, C, D, E, F, G team, but they're all named the same. They all wear the same uniform, the same hat, same logo. And so it's a little easier to swallow for the parents. And some parents probably don't even know that they're on the G team. But like, did you ever have, like, you have a distinction between, hey, these guys are going to be our local and these guys are our regional? Like, was there pushback from parents?
I mean, at first, when we made that transition, we were using the term PRD Select as basically our B team, and our Ghost team was turning into our A team. Again, like, we were a small organization at that point. Like, we only had, I would say, somewhere between 70 to 80 players, right? And we were acquiring players at a really fast pace. So, to be honest with you, Rich, like, we try to be really transparent and as black and white as possible. We always have, and we still do that.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, like, if you realize, like, we didn't own a facility. We subleased facilities. So we didn't have any overhead
Mm-hmm.
that was making us panic that if we didn't have X amount of teams, we weren't going to pay our rent, or we were going to be behind the 8 ball.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a nice luxury time, because we weren't tied to any big numbers. So we kind of just were very honest with what we saw with people. We didn't play at a national level at that time to necessarily think we were going to a WWBA and making a Final Four or anything of that nature. We were just looking to compete on a national stage with kids that we thought were potential Division I players, which were actually our 22 class. And then we would play regionally in PG or whatever tournaments around here. And we were pretty honest. Like, we didn't get that much pushback. Most of the kids that were playing for us at the time were also training with us. So we had personal relationships. We were honest in terms of what their limitations were or what they excelled in. And I don't know if the high school background for me helped, but we had a pretty good trusted community. And your parents aren't happy with X, Y, and Z, want more. And listen, we get that more than ever now, right? But
Yeah.
I think if you're going to give them options, and if this is a service industry, like, nobody owns a player, nobody owns a person. Like, people have free will, and they can choose to go play wherever they want. And you just hope that you're doing enough to keep the ones around that you need to keep around.
For sure. Now, you mentioned in there when you were the training piece of it was all you guys are renting space at a variety of facilities. Is that how you still do it?
No. We were a mobile training academy, believe it or not, until last February. So we didn't see a need to bite that bullet, especially in the area where we are, where, like, overhead is pretty expensive in facilities. We had some good things going on and some relationships where we were able to get enough space for the programming in the winter that we wanted to run. And then we did find the space, and we didn't launch it until last February, but we are happy that we did. It's a 15,000 square foot space in Tinton Falls, outfitted to exactly the specs that we wanted. So our path on being facility owners is actually just beginning, even though we've been in this industry.
You blanked out. You were saying even though you've been in this industry, and then you blanked out. What'd you say?
I would say we've been in the industry for about 20 years, but we're only a year into being, like, traditional facility owners.
Yeah. On the one hand, how awesome to have your own space and it's built out and you control the full schedule. On the other hand, I bet you don't miss having to make that monthly payment. You know what I mean? There's a little less pressure when you're just going to be the sublease for a 3-hour block on a Thursday than when you got to make the whole monthly payment, isn't it?
I mean, we're pretty conservative people in general. So, like, we didn't bite off. And as the CEO of the company, like, I just decided that I didn't want to bite off that chunk until we knew it wasn't going to be a problem and it's not a stressor. So we are fortunate. Like, we have about 400 players in this one sector, and PRD in general has multiple sectors, but the Central Jersey sector, which is based out of Tinton Falls, is the home to about 400 players. So between memberships and private lessons and arm performance camp and, extra velocity camps that we run and different programming we run, like, we weren't really overly concerned with the number at this point, but that's exactly why we waited, because we didn't want it to distract us. We never wanted to be about having to pay our bills to make decisions for our kids.
It's an excellent lesson especially if there's a guy who's just getting going in this thing, and you could get really excited and go find a big building and sign a 5-year lease, even though you don't have the economics to support it. Like, I look at here in my town. Listen, we've got the big fancy, the facilities with the indoor infields and the state of the art strength and conditioning, all that stuff. And those are great. They're wonderful. Yep. But we also have the guys who run a really good training and lessons business, and they sublet, a tunnel. And like, honestly, like, man, like those guys, I think there's a lot to be said for that sort of style.
It depends on what you scale. Like we, even in our other sectors that we have, some that we don't have facilities in, like there's a certain number of committed players that we want before we take on more overhead. And there's a type of player. There's players that train a bunch, that are really serious about their future. And even if they're 11 or 12 years old, parents are getting them into doing X, Y, and Z. And then you sometimes you have players that are very seasonal, and seasonal players don't necessarily fill your facility the same way that guys that train consistently do. Right? So you have to be careful with that when you own a facility and you're opening one without like a large funnel of teams.
Let's talk about this. I've heard the words sectors. You've got different sectors and different groups that are sort of under your purview, your sort of umbrella, if you will. Let's talk about that and sort of in parallel with that. You mentioned things like memberships, and if anybody's heard more than one of these podcasts, I'm a fan of the membership model. So I'd kind of like to steer the direction of the conversation to go. Let's learn about sort of like how you have things laid out as an organization, and then within the facility, like how does that facility operate sort of at a high level, specifically with these memberships.
Sure. So we consider the Central Jersey sector. We call it Central Jersey Ghost in Tinton Falls. Again, that's where we started. That's where PRD originated from. PRD is now the umbrella company. It's the parent company for everything that we do underneath of it. So there was a restructuring. PRD Baseball Academy is the legal name for everything we do under our roof. So Central Jersey, we have the 15,000 square foot Ghost Lab facility that we just opened in February. We do memberships out of there. We have currently 50 to 60 members. May they be pitchers, may they be hitters, may they be dual players. And there's different packages that we offer monthly to players that want to train more than once or twice a week in a lesson and that are able and functional in a self-led environment through weight training, speed training, arm care, may it be hitting off machines with each other, maybe drill work and things of that nature. So the membership model for us, Rich, really exists currently in this primary sector, which is the Central Jersey sector. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do that down the road in other places.
Mm-hmm. But in the main facility, in
the main facility, we have memberships, and we do it at a pretty high rate, and we do it at a pretty good price. So like we want it to be accessible for our clients. From a club perspective, we got to a point about 2.5 years ago where we had a lot of teams, and every tryout, every season, we would have 200, 250 new kids show up and want to be part of our teams. And we made a conscious decision at that moment. We looked around and we said, if we want 50 or 60 teams in Central Jersey, we probably could do that. But there's some challenges with that. One, quality coaching. It's not easy to find coaches that share the same views, that have the same passion that you may have as a club owner, right? So we didn't want to dilute our product to a point where we were just kept growing and growing and growing in one region, because we thought that could have some negative effect down the road. So we decided to cap it in Central Jersey at around 30 teams. And what we do is we offer re-ups to current clients, and obviously we try out new people, and we make decisions every year that, how are we going to upgrade these teams? And at this current time in this sector, like if you're on our top team, you're probably a projectable Division I athlete, if not a committed Division I athlete to older ages. And even teams 2 and teams 3 and teams 4 are extremely competitive. And to be honest with you, it's like splitting hairs when we roster because we designed it that way.
Mm-hmm.
The other sectors, we looked at what other clubs did, and it seemed like the franchise model was the most popular in club baseball. How familiar are you with the franchise model?
I am personally pretty familiar, but somebody who's listening at home might be less familiar. So maybe just give the 30,000 foot view so we can compare and contrast.
So the franchise model is when a club with branding or a name that the average consumer in the amateur baseball world would recognize, they take their name, they put it on a group of teams or a facility in a different area, and the trade-off is that facility, may it be Neighbor Joe's Baseball Academy, can now be called, the branding name. They pay a fee per player per year back to the company. So if we were the franchise, and we don't franchise, but if we were the franchise, we would be putting a ghost franchise in a different area. That area would pay us, let's call it $200 per player back, and we would make all the money on the uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
And we really wouldn't have anything to do with the operation or day-to-day of that club. So basically, they would be using our name to gain credibility and hope to spike numbers and bring more people through the door. Right.
And I'll add, it works, and it
does work.
It's a pretty good model for some clubs. I'm just to play devil's advocate, and then I'm gonna we'll compare and contrast what you guys are doing versus this model. But the idea, like if I'm running a small little local club that nobody's ever heard of with no name recognition, but the players are pretty good, if I can go get a different hat and put it on and pay for access to that hat. And, oh, by the way, it might help me get into an event that, that little old me couldn't get us into. Cool. That's worth the price of admissions, right? And then the franchise, the owner of that particular organization, they're going to get paid in multiple ways, including, like you said, they'll get a per player. And they're probably going to reap the benefits on the uniform side as well, and maybe some other stuff as well. But that's where the old joke is that some of these companies have become they're not baseball companies; they've become uniform companies. It's not. And I say this a lot. It's not good or it's not good or bad. It's just different.
It is. And we're not opposed. It's not something that I'll tell you we'll never do down the road. It just for us, when we look at the franchise model, there's two types of clubs that franchise. One that is really just looking for that excess income or that passive income, I should say, and really does not have any interest in who the players are or what they are. They're just using their name and branding and for a financial gain, which is totally fine. There's other franchises that franchise clubs and then look to take their best players into their national side and use those as like kind of feeding grounds to feed their better teams. And that was one, and I'll leave the club unnamed, but one club in the Northeast was doing that. They were franchising, and then they were coming in and taking players that really were in that region and really were going to play for that sector,
mm-hmm.
and kind of leaving them with the players they didn't want anymore.
Right.
And that's not really a partnership. So like if you're going to franchise as a club owner, there has to be, in my opinion, there has to be a true partnership in anything you do with another organization. Like it can't be one-sided. So we looked at that and we said, you know what, we're not ready. We're not ready to just totally give up creative control of what our brand is, and we're not comfortable with that. So we went and we created our way, which is really a joint venture or a partnership where we find clubs that, we speak with them, we sit with them, and we find what their needs are. And every deal is unique for us. Like some people want more administrative help. Like some people need operation help. Some people need to be organized a little bit more. Some people want to piggyback off of discounts, want to piggyback off of, like you said, ability to get into other tournaments. So every one of our joint ventures or partnerships is completely different. But one thing I will say is that we actively take part in the operation of each one of those sectors. And we don't just let it go and not pay attention to it. We know the players. I'm a big culture guy. I'm a high school coach before I was a club owner, right? So I really am passionate about trying to create culture and to close the gap between players that might live in Central Jersey versus Pennsylvania versus South Jersey versus Staten Island. So currently we have a sector in South Jersey that was formerly Legends Baseball. It's in Sewell, New Jersey. They have about 100 players. We have a sector in Newtown, Pennsylvania called Go Squad PA. It's attached to the Newtown Athletic Center, which is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. They have about 170 players in that section of Pennsylvania. We have a sector in North Jersey, which was formerly the Garden State Ducks. They are out of Fairfield and Parsippany, that area. They have 5 teams currently. And we're in a joint venture with Richmond County Baseball Club, RCBC, that's owned by George Quinn and Nick Defendus.
Yeah, Nick Defendus, friend of the pod. He's been on in the past.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah, Nick's great guy. So again, each situation is different regionally, and then of course you mentioned before Ajay Volamiri of Artillery Scout. We have a deal in place with them. Again, a partnership that we help operate. We help Ajay. We support Ajay. We do anything we can, to make Artillery a better product. And again, they fall under our PRD umbrella as well. But again, the premise of everything we do is when we go into a situation, we have to believe in the product. We have to believe in the directors of that product because each sector needs a point guy. And there's going to be challenges and, there's going to be ups and downs, but we're in it together.
Yeah, that's cool. It is a little bit of a nuance on the sort of the traditional franchise model that a lot of the clubs are using. I do like the idea that it feels like the way this is set up is as almost a true partnership that you guys would be pulling on the same end of the rope, as opposed to, hey, we're just sending you some money for the use of your hat, which is quite honestly what a lot of, I don't mean to have that sound like it's a, disparaging. It's, again, if I'm running a local little team, I could benefit from a much better logo with a logo that has, some cachet to it. So it's not a bad thing, not a good thing, just different models. So that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Sure.
By the way, I'm so terrible at this. We're a half hour in. I probably should have mentioned you guys can connect with Pat over on Twitter at PRD Baseball, at PRD Baseball. And if you go to Instagram, it is at PRD Baseball Academy, which is also the website that has all things PRD in Ghost and such. So I probably should do a better job getting that done at the beginning, but 30 minutes in is, I guess that's better than 60 minutes in. That's May, you gave us a pretty good rundown. Let me ask you a question. I don't normally ask this, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. What we just talked about a lot of things, that you guys are doing that are a little bit different than some of the other clubs that are growing. Not specifically about this, but within just all of the baseball stuff. Is there anything that is challenging you right now? that you look at and you're like, man, this thing's a pain. What, or I wish I could get X, Y, Z done. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, like again, with my background with teaching, I left teaching to do this full time. I'm in office probably 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, Rich, anyone that runs a large club that tells you there's not challenges or things that need to be upgraded day to day is just not either seeing it or the effort's not there, because this is a new industry. Nobody, although it started in the late 90s and there's some really monster clubs that have been doing it really well for a long time, it's one of the younger industries that you can be a part of. So there's really no path that's completely paved perfectly, and there's always adjustments that need to be made. So from a coaching perspective, I mean, it is difficult to find people that are, again, passionate about coaching each team, and especially at the younger ages, like the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12s. One thing that I really find, and one thing that we're becoming better at, more particular, is the type of personality that you want leading the charge at different age groups, right? That's one. And then when you get to the older age groups, it's nice to have people with enormous baseball resumes. It's nice to have people with aspirations, but longevity in your club as a coach and finding guys that are invested in the product, invested in your kids, and that want to be there for a while, there's different maneuvers and there's different things you can do from the coaching perspective. So I think currently, and just speaking to other owners too, I think staffing is always such a crucial part of how positive or negative your growth is. And that's something that we put a lot of time into, things of that nature. Organization, I mean, you just can never get more or too organized. It's impossible, right? So you have to have the tech, you have to have the resources to be able to not have to collect checks in the mail, or not have to, not realize that some payments aren't in, and things of that nature, because there's a lot of money going out the door every day, and you just have to make sure that you're financially savvy enough to keep up with it and to keep your finances in order.
And I'm glad you brought that up. This is something you and I were discussing a little bit of before we hit record. Anybody goes over to the PRD Baseball Academy.com website, they will see logos of a couple of partners that you have, including league apps on here. And we've talked about league apps a lot. A lot of people are utilizing them for their front end websites. They do make a nice website that's pretty customizable. It's kind of funny, man. There's other league apps has some competitors. But when you go to league apps competitors websites, the teams that use the league apps competitors, every single site is exactly the same. And it just rubs me the wrong way. It probably doesn't matter to anybody else on earth, but I go to the websites of so many organizations. So when I go to 4 in a row that have the exact same layout, I just cringe. So that's right out the gate, the front-facing sort of public view of the league app stuff is very cool. But that's not really where their power is. Their power is the back-end stuff that allows people like you to handle registrations for camps and team fees and the money, the inbound part of it. And man, I told you before, there is not a worse phrase in the English language than checks in the mail, because it's not. It's not. And just when you've got 50 players, 50 families to deal with, it's not that big a deal. When you have 1,000, it's a big deal. You know what I mean? And if 10% of your people are 10 days late on payment, that stinks. And so the alternative is something like league apps, and just set it and forget it. It's on the first of the month, it's going to ding the account, done. And listen, I know I'm going off on a rant here. Probably don't need you to rant anymore, because I don't even use the thing, but I love it.
I mean, you're talking to my accountant side. Like I as next accounting, like it really is an accounting system as well, at least for on the revenue side. So it does make the year end much easier. Like the reports you can print out, like keeping your taxes in order and just making sure that you're doing things the right way. Like it is a huge benefit like that.
Yeah. Here's a little tip or strategy. I know everybody hates paying the extra processing fees. Okay, cool. I get it. Here's what you do. If people are really going to complain and they need to pay cash, I would charge them more, because the processing and the manual labor that's required in cash and checks, not to even take into account the fact that the person who's paying with a check is probably going to be late. Like, I would charge those people more money than what you have to charge person to compensate for the processing fee. Like, just disincentivize anybody from paying cash. Like, I want 0 pieces of paper from people, just electronic.
I mean, that goes into that also goes into the facility side. Like, I was an instructor for 17 years, and there's people that want to pay cash and things of that nature. Like in our facility down in Tin Falls, we only accept payment through Easy Facility for lessons. That's it. Like, there's no cash, there's no check. And what that does do too is it just ensures that the money ends up where it's supposed to end up for the lesson, even if you're not necessarily on site. So it's clean, right? We're in an electronic age. It's it's a have for any facility or club owner.
This is something that my buddy who rents a cage, who does 50 lessons a week, and that's his entire business, he doesn't need this. He doesn't need it. Right. But when you have 500 families coming through your facility, these are the things you need to begin to think about when you begin to scale. You have one team, you might not need to run payments through league apps. When you have 35 teams, you do. It begins to scale will expose your shortcomings.
Oh, I mean, like I always say, like I meet a lot of people and some great people in this industry, and having the background in the corporate world and the business side, like not just the baseball side, it's huge in terms of scaling and responsible expansion and making sure that you're ahead of the game in terms of what's next. Because like the other thing about running a club is that you always have to be willing to pivot. Like, you have to be willing to do things differently season to season, year to year. And you can't be afraid to take some, calculated risks in terms of how you format your club, because the landscape of amateur baseball literally changes every single year.
Do you have an example of a pivot that comes to mind? Something in the last few years?
Sure. I mean, so like take tournaments, like major national events.
Yeah.
Like, Perfect Game is the monster. Like, PBR is up and coming. PBR has some events that snuck up on people, such as the PBR Cup in Lake Point in the fall. And that's why I love having Ajay around, because Ajay from Artillery, he just knows all the nuances. He knows what's coming. He talks to everybody. He talks to the kids. Hey, what's the next hot thing that's coming through? And he just always seems to be really good with understanding how to build a schedule that attracts attention and that the kids like, right? So each year, and if you go back and do research 5 or 6 years ago, some tournaments that may still be there are not nearly as popular as they were in year to year. While one tournament fades, it's a tournament host's job to create a new event that's going to trend, right? Or obviously their business is in trouble. So you have to be in the know with, I mean, you're going to have your Jupiter tournament, your upper class Worlds. That's always going to be a phenomenal tournament, difficult tournament to get into. But I think Perfect Game does a pretty good job reinventing themselves in terms of, okay, this national event is losing a little steam. Let's create this and let's put some buzz around it. PBR is doing a really good job in some events. We're in the 17U event this year. It's the Florida Championships, but they're putting together a bracket that's going to be just excessively competitive, and Artillery and East Coast Goes are both in the same bracket with a bunch of monsters. So, like, they're doing some really specialized events and getting some really big names in it. You know, there's some tournament hosts like Prospect Select that are doing some things that should have some legs. So you just kind of have to really know that. And then, of course, there's other models. Like, we do a lot of on-campus scout days. Obviously, you have to have talent and you have to have numbers for a college to want to work with you to create your own internal camp with players that are from, right? We do a ton of that. Like, the longer I'm in this industry, at 16 and 17, like, our sole focus, or we should say our number one focus, is trying to extend the careers of every player that comes to us. That's our mission statement. We're just going to try to extend your kid's career for as long as he wants to play baseball, whatever that may mean to him. And the more collegiate exposure, the more campus visits, the more college coaches that they can be around, kids start to figure out who they are without you necessarily having to be the bad guy and saying, hey, you know, yeah, you want to go to school X, but you were at school X and they haven't called. So what are we going to do? What's our next play? Is it keep going to school X's that are on the same level?
Yeah. Okay,
let's go to another one. You didn't get a call. So what's that mean? Right? So, you know, organically, I think we do a really good job getting kids off the board. The last 2 years, we got over 90% of our players that graduated with us to the NCAA level between the Division 1, 2, and 3 level.
That's man, you're making my heart happy, because once upon a time I used to run some bus tours, and the whole point was to get boots on the ground at as many different schools and types of schools as possible. Because you're right, like they begin to figure it out. You know what I mean? And it's not it's not just, hey, I love this, but it's also, I hate this. And that's a big deal. Like, if you can figure out things you don't like, okay, cool. When another school that is sort of equivalent to that one you just told me you hate calls, well then, all right, cool. You have some information about that. It's just like, let's try and give you as much information as possible. Because I mean, the reality is most of these kids' biggest decision they've had to make is like Nike or Reebok. And then they're asked to make a college decision, and it's a pretty big choice. You know,
it is. And you know, it's hard because, like, every age has a different avenue. Like, you're not getting Division III kids off the board when they're 15, right? Division III kids, like, aren't offering kids as sophomores. So you do, like, there's a balance between keeping kids interested that have college baseball potential, but also not overextending their parents into like 6 or 7 national trips in a matter of 3 months, when you pretty much know, like, this kid throws 77, 78, he's going to be really good in a couple years, but right now, like, he's not going to get there.
Yeah,
right?
It's a tightrope. It's a tightrope you have to walk.
Yeah, and you have to expose them, though, to the environments to a point, because if you don't, when they go down there when they're ready, sometimes it's like a deer in headlights because they've never seen it before. Yeah. So, like, there's definitely like, at least in our opinion, like, there is a path where if you can create the proper exposure for that kid now and who that kid may be in the future, like, it's so unique and it's so customized per individual. We're just so fortunate to have the numbers we have, because we're able to pair, like, paths together, where most clubs, if you have 2 teams per age, like, you really can't do that. You're going to have, like, a Power 5 commit with a small D1 commit with a couple D3 commits with 5 kids that aren't going to play college baseball, right? Where it just doesn't work. And that's where, like, teams like Ajay with Artillery, they do really well, and they get a lot of players because kids want to play with like-minded kids. Right? So they need to also play with like-skilled kids for their own development.
No, and the other part is it helps laser focus the schedule that you're able to put together. One of the things that drives me bananas is when a team with one good one high-end elite prospect ends up they build the entire schedule around his ability. Because, I mean, let's be honest, the parents have the ego and they want to all go to this event, even though their kids should be at the other events. And and if you can sync up an entire roster of similarly skilled kids, then you can schedule accordingly, schedule properly, and be in the events where the coaches who are recruiting that type of player are going to be, which is super important. It's like eventually you want to transition from sort of a mass marketing approach to a target marketing approach. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
which
And
if you're Ajay and you've got, you know, a 15U artillery team that is just absolutely loaded with SEC guys, guess what? He's going to be at those events. That's where he needs to be. You know,
as he should be.
Exactly. As he should be.
I mean, the artillery kit, like I didn't mean to cut you off, Rich, but the thing with artillery that people don't understand is that the whole objective or point of artillery is to put a kid of that caliber in an uncomfortable situation early enough where they have to learn how to rise around kids that are as good, if not better than them, because that's the reality. If you're a Tennessee commit, when you walk on the campus as a freshman, if you don't know how to rise from the ground up and you don't know how to like stick out amongst 30 or 40 just ridiculous athletes, like it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like, again, like artillery, different. East Coast goes scout. It's a mix of that. It's like we have our committed kids and then we have uncommitted kids that are going to most likely be Division I prospects. You got to build a schedule for that. Then you have your small D1, D2, D3 teams. You got to be able to build a schedule for that. And regional variation is something that people don't think about. But varying like your exposure in different regions of the United States, like it really is effective. Like a kid might not get attention in the Southeast, but they get attention in the Northeast. Like we've had kids
100%
that are really good not get attention in the Northeast or Southeast and then get out on the West Coast. So like you do have to travel and you do have to get a variation of different looks from different places.
Pat, this has been fun, man. Unfortunately, I didn't get to any of my sort of normal preset questions. We may have to come back for a round two. I wanted to give you, if you have any sort of parting words for any coaches or moms, dads, or players who are still listening, you know, you can give a sort of a last word here.
Oh boy. So like as a parent, right, and as a player, like the idea for parents and players are to find a club and find a team that, you know, they can excel at, they can fit into a place that they're going to be happy and all that. And people like that go to certain clubs, many times they'll be with a club and even with us for 5 or 6 years, and they feel like they need to be loyal to whatever the product is or whatever the brand is. I tell people this all the time, and I tell them very openly that we're in a service industry. Like on the end of the day, it's our job to try to put kids in the best position to succeed. It's not hard feelings if someone moves from one club to another. It's not something that should make people upset. It's certainly not something that people should feel guilty about. If there's a better opportunity for a player X, Y, or Z somewhere else, like that's okay. Like there's plenty of baseball players for clubs to try out and clubs to formulate teams with. But one thing that really that strikes me in this industry is we truly don't believe in the our player or my player philosophy. Mm-hmm. We just don't think that exists. I think Ajay hit on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like we strictly believe that the player should have choice. The parent should have choice. They should have free will. And if you're doing the job that you should be doing, like most parents are going to want to stay with you, and most players are too. So I just think that not falling into that trap is super, super important as you're looking for teams to play on.
I think that's very well said. It sort of, you know, removes ego. There's understanding. Hey, some you know what? I do like Pizza Hut, but sometimes I want Papa John's, and that's okay. You know what? I've been with you a couple years, but I want to go play somewhere else. Okay, cool. Go. You know what I mean? Go.
If someone's providing more amenities, they're providing an environment that is better, is more suitable. Like, it's a service industry.
Yeah.
Right. And on the flip side, like, it's the same thing for a club. They don't have to take a kid back. Like, if it doesn't mesh for them, like, it's not their responsibility. Again, there's plenty of options. Our job as a club is to do the best job we can to make people want to be here, not feel like they have to be here.
Well put. I think that's a perfect last word. I appreciate you coming on today. Again, we can direct people to Twitter at PRD Baseball, or over on Instagram or the internet at PRD Baseball Academy. PRDBaseballacademy.com is the website. Pat, I appreciate you coming on. Don't hang up. I'm going to stop the call, and don't hang up yet.